Hi, I'm Alanna Irving, and I'm here to talk to you today about full circle leadership. And because this is the Festival of Maintenance, I'd love to talk about how maintenance actually is a kind of leadership. And when we see the full picture of leadership, we can understand what an important part that it is. A few years ago, I found myself thinking a lot about the dichotomy between dreamers versus doers. I think of myself as very much on the doer side of that. I'm a person who focuses a lot on implementation, on maintenance, and optimization. And I was hanging out with a lot of visionary dreamer type people who had tons of ideas and were always starting fires and running on to the next thing. And to be honest, I was feeling a little bit annoyed. I felt kind of like I was chasing after fire starters with a bucket of water. Or another way to say that is sort of doing a lot of the behind the scenes work that actually goes into making things happen behind big visionary ideas. I think that in our society, a lot of times leadership, people use it to mean visionary leadership, having ideas, being out front, leading somewhere new, trailblazing. But I think there's operational leadership is absolutely just as much a part of leadership and is incredibly important. Visionary leadership can't really go anywhere without operational leadership. Operational leaders are leaders. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that. I started thinking even more deeply, I'd say, about leadership and inquiring into exactly what it is, how it works. And I had some eye-opening conversations with visionary leaders and understood a little bit more their side of the equation in terms of the real drive to make sure that we don't sell ourselves short, that we're not missing big opportunities, that we're actually stretching as far as we can to reach for the stars, and also some of the pressure and anxiety that comes with that. And I guess gaining a little bit more empathy for visionary leaders, and also helping them gain empathy for the more operational side of the equation. I came to realize that those two are not polarized opposite ends of some linear spectrum, but actually those ends bend around and meet each other to form a circle. Out of this understanding, I came up with the full circle leadership model, and I'm going to talk today in more detail about each of these parts, so don't feel like you have to take it all in at once. There's visionary aspects of leadership around the circle, there's operational aspects of leadership around the circle, and the two cannot exist without each other. The full circle leadership model is a thinking tool, and you can use it on a couple of different levels. The first one is thinking about project life cycles. How do initiatives or ideas get started? How do we know when they're finished? How can we ask ourselves if we're actually taking all the steps we need to take to bring something all the way around the circle? The second level that the full circle leadership model works on is about diverse kinds of leadership, understanding strengths and weaknesses of people and teams. So you can rate yourself, for example, 1 to 5 on each of the steps around the circle, and that will reveal a shape. I'll show you my graph as an example. So this is me over here in the purple. So you can see here some of the areas that I probably am strong and areas that I probably am weaker at or less likely to value or less likely to notice. You can also use this as a thinking tool on the level of teams. A while ago, I did this exercise with a whole team of people, and we put our shapes together and revealed the shape of our leadership profile as a team. So you can see the team as a whole was quite strong, sensing, inquiring, envisioning, prototyping, very strong, but had a weakness around optimization. So a little bit of a gap there. So you can see I'm quite strong on optimization. So that's why I often found myself being the one in meetings going, guys, can't we just, take the thing we've built and make it better instead of moving on to building the next new thing? We also had a bit of a weakness around evaluation, which is also an area that I tend not to think about enough. So there was another guy on the team who was very strong with evaluation. He was often the lone voice calling for focus there when I would have missed the importance. All right, I'm going to go into talking about the individual steps around the circle so that we can use this thinking tool a little bit more deeply. So the first one is sense, and this is often where something will start at the very, very beginning before it's even a thing or has a name. I do think of the image of a spider on a web sort of feeling for vibrations right across the whole environment. People who are strong in sensing leadership are very strong in empathy, so I would call this a leadership of empathy. In each of these kinds of leadership, I've also thought about a persona that sort of could represent this type of leader, or might remind us of people in our social circles who have this kind of leadership. So in the case of sense, the persona is the nurturer. The nurturer being somebody who's quite empathetic, in tune with what other people are going through, and notices and cares about that. Measure is what I think of, how can we tell if this kind of leadership is valued in this environment? What can we measure? So if it's a space that's a good place for quite a bit of vulnerability, I would say there's good, strong sensing leadership in that space. Shadow, this is the flip side. Every single kind of positive type of leadership, I think, also has a shadow side. So the shadow side of sensing, I would say, is overwhelm. If you're in tune with everything or trying to empathize with everything, it's very easy to get overloaded. The other thing I want to point out about the format I'm using for each of the stages of leadership in this presentation is the little light bulb down in the corner. And that's just to symbolize that this is on the visionary side of the circle. So remember, this is working on two different levels. It's working on the project life cycle level and on the leadership diversity level. So we're going to talk about different kinds of leaderships, but just also notice how sensing, being the first step, leads into inquiring, being where you could go after you've noticed there's something there. So the leadership of contextualization. Inquire is all about asking questions, as you might expect. I've chosen the image here of two people having tea together because one of the strongest inquiring leaders that I know, her key tool of leadership sometimes is having a cup of tea with somebody, sitting down and having that conversation, that connection. So the persona is a facilitator, somebody who can guide people to ask the questions they need to ask and find those answers that they need to find. A measure, and again, that's how can we tell if this environment is strong or safe for this kind of leadership? I would say the measure for inquiry is inclusion. Have people actually been asked? Are people actually being included in the conversation? How many people actually have been reached? The shadow side to inquiring leadership, I would say, is permission seeking, feeling like you need to ask other people whether it's okay to go ahead, or not being able to just take action even if you haven't been able to ask everyone or get everyone on the same page. Next is envision. So this is the classic visionary leader type of skill set. After an idea has been noticed and researched a bit, coming up with, okay, what's possible here? The leadership of aspiration. The persona of this is, of course, the dreamer. And the measure is creativity. Is this environment full of creativity? Is this a place where people can come up with ideas and make new things and be celebrated for that? The shadow side of envision is distraction. It's very easy to get interested in a lot of different things at once, chase after a lot of different dreams, and not do the work of actually implementing them. So the prototype is an interesting one. If you look down in the corner, you'll see next to the light bulb is a hammer. That's the symbol I've chosen for the operational side of the circle. This is the transition point between the visionary and the operational side. Prototyping is both. It's both a visionary type of leadership and an operational type of leadership, because it's when you actually get hands-on and start to make something real, but it's still quite experimental. The persona for prototyping is the hacker. This is somebody who loves to tinker, who loves to build things, to try things out, even if they don't know how it's going to go. The measure of whether an environment is conducive to prototyping or what people care about in that environment is efficacy. Does it work? Can we use it? Can I immediately pick this thing up and start playing with it? The shadow side to prototyping, I would say, is obsession. A lot of people who fit that persona, they get very involved in tinkering, wanting to try new things, and possibly forget, well, what was the bigger vision we were working on, or where is this actually going in a more real sense? So now moving into strongly the operational side of the circle, we come to evaluate. After you've tried something out, you ask yourself, well, how did it go? This is the leadership of measurement. The persona here is the scientist. And the measure, I would say, is integrity. I mentioned before my former colleague who was very strong at the leadership of evaluation. Integrity was very important to him. Have we actually been real with ourselves about the data, what this shows, what we've learned? The shadow side to that being cynicism. It's very easy to write off possibilities if you're always looking for how to pick them apart. Next up is operationalization. I love that word, it's a long one, but I think it's really important to have in a vocabulary. This is the leadership of implementation, where the rubber hits the road and you're actually trying to take this new possibility and make it real, implement it in your environment. The persona for this is the negotiator, because when you actually try to make things real, It never goes the way you had ideally envisioned it. There's always compromises. And operationalization is all about negotiating through those compromises and finding out how to keep moving forward. The measure here is accessibility, and I think of that in terms of, can people actually use this thing? Is the link working? Has the room been booked? Is this actually happening? And the shadow side to that would probably be ruthlessness, and I'm talking about myself here. A little bit of ruthlessness is probably necessary because you do have to make those compromises and hard calls to actually implement something, but you can't take it too far and lose sight of all of the human emotion that perhaps has gone into this project or the original vision's beauty and idealism. And here we come to maintain, the most relevant slide of the day at the Festival of Maintenance. This is the leadership of sustaining. I've chosen the persona of the captain to emphasize the active nature of the leadership of maintenance. I think some people think about maintenance as something static, something that doesn't move, it's about staying still. But actually, to keep something steady and on track in a changing world, you have to be constantly moving, constantly adjusting, constantly aware of what's going on around you. Kind of like sailing a ship, where the winds are constantly changing, the tides are constantly changing, but you want to keep going in that direction. And the leaders that are behind maintenance are the ones who make that reliability possible. The shadow side to this leadership of sustaining, I would say, is bureaucracy. It can be very tempting to build a lot of systems to help maintain, to help keep things on track, and sometimes the systems go out of date with reality, and we're not adapting fast enough, and then people feel somewhat oppressed by bureaucracy. I say this as someone who has many times tried to make such systems and had to learn again that nope, maintenance has to be a constantly active, living kind of leadership. And finally, that brings us to optimize. This is the leadership of improvement. This is the people who are never satisfied with things just as they are. They might call them the perfectionists. And the measure of optimization leadership is commitment. Can you stay with this thing that has been created to help it reach its full potential? To take everything that we've learned and actually stick with it and apply it. And the shadow side to optimization, I would say, is meddling. It can be possible to keep worrying on the thing even when it's time to declare it done. So what I'd like to point out here is, again, down in the bottom corner, we've got the light bulb and the hammer next to each other. Optimizing is both an operational kind of leadership and a visionary kind of leadership, interested in possibilities. Optimize actually can be the end, it can be the last stage, and then things can finish, or it can lead naturally back into sensing, because as you are optimizing, you start to notice what is coming up that could be new, what is the next place that we could go. And this brings me to the final points I'd like to make about full circle leadership. The first is that the process of going all the way around the circle, really challenging yourself to go through each step, I think is a process that starts to build capacity for making progress together. Depending on the project, you may want to, loop back. Perhaps you go through, evaluate, and realize that you need to make a new prototype and go back through again. That's absolutely a natural part of the process. But by getting all the way back around to optimize, back into sensing again, that's how you start to build collective memory. You can kind of think about the circle, in that case, taking on a third dimension and becoming an upward spiral where every time you go around, you're actually making progress in a bigger sense. Next is the importance of diverse teams, the importance of recognizing all the different forms that leadership takes and how they complement each other and are actually quite necessary to bring out the best in each other. So I'm quite an operational leader, as I said, but I've realized over time that I do my best work in collaboration with visionaries, and visionaries do their best work in collaboration with me, that we complement each other and need each other on a certain level. In an environment that's really strong on maintenance, maybe that's about valuing a bit of the visionary leadership, coming up with new ideas, innovation, and change. In an environment full of visionaries, maybe it's about really valuing the work of the maintainers. If you are feeling misunderstood or unsupported in the type of leadership that you are bringing, or if that is not even seen as leadership in the environment, you're not going to be able to bring your best self to that work. And I think the best teams are the ones that have diverse and balanced kinds of leadership going into them and collaborating well together. Finally, I just want to emphasize again, coming full circle, maintenance itself is leadership, is an active kind of leadership, and I think the people who are gifted at maintenance leadership should be proud maintenance leaders, and that we can help perhaps visionary leaders or other kinds of leaders better understand the kind of leadership that we bring, and then we can work on our empathy towards the kind of leadership that they bring as well. So full circle leadership, it's not, the end-all be-all answer to what is leadership. It's a thinking tool, and I hope that on the level of project life cycles and on the level of mapping individual and team strengths and weaknesses in leadership, that it can be useful to you. If you'd like more information about full circle leadership, including a downloadable worksheet, please check out my website. Thank you very much.